So good morning, everybody. It's Hashkacha Pratas. It's divine providence that we should be doing this class today. My wife pointed out to me today that today's Chitas, we do Chumash with Rashi and Tehillim for the day and Tanya for today. And we include Hayom Yom. We also include Rambam if we can, but we include Hayom Yom, which is a book that was compiled by the Rebbe. And it was basically put together, was written by the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe's father-in-law, but the Rebbe is the one that compiled it. And the entrance for today, which is the 26th of Menachem, it says, from a public talk of my revered father, the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, part of the Chassidic Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, is the mitzvah to recount the story of the Exodus from Egypt verbally. This means telling Chassidic stories and listening and internalizing them in one's innermost self. One should realize that every story offers a directive for our lives. Every story ought to refine our characters, our midos, and produce inner gusto, inner chayas, inner enthusiasm in the loving performance of mitzvahs, and sensitize us to perceive the pleasantness of the teachings of Hasidus. There's a book that's written, it's Hayom Yom, and it's sort of an expanded, and it's called Tackling Life's Tasks, put out by Sichas in English. And it's Hayom Yom, and then it's followed every day with a piece that elaborates a little bit. And today it says that the art of storytelling has always been characterized. It's always characterized Hasidic communities and continues to serve as a catalyst in the spiritual maturation of every Chassid. And in fact, the Alter Rebbe once recalled, when we used to hear a Torah discourse from the Rebbe, the Maggid of Mezrich, we saw this as Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. And when we heard a story from his mouth, this was our Torah Shebichsav, our written Torah. Like the stories of Tanakh, the written Torah, Hasidic stories are living Torah, multi-dimensional expressions of divine truth. And moreover, these truths are expressed not as theoretical principles, but as reactions and guideposts to our day-to-day experience. In the words of Rabbi Shlomo Yosef Zevin, it can be fairly said that the doctrines of Hasidism and the halacha, so to speak, of Hasidism and the stories of Hasidism are its agada. The agada of Hasidism, with its stories and the road builders and trailblazers of the movement, the tzaddikim, and their lives and their deeds and attitudes and attributes, their customs and their conduct, their words and their wonders. This agada of stories rouses the heart, revives the soul, breathes the spirit of life into the driest of bones. That was today's selection. So we'll start off with a couple of stories. Last week I did a class, and we did some things where we mentioned a couple of stories about Rabbi Meir of Premishlam. So let me just pull this up here. You know what? One of the stories I was going to tell today, just a short story about Rabbi Meir Premishlam. He once was walking up a steep mountain to get to the mikveh, and it was very hard to traverse that area because it was all icy, and it was the middle of the winter, and it was very difficult. And nobody was able to do this. Younger people were not able to do this. Rabbi Meir Premishlam was able to go. So these two young guys were watching him, and they were sort of mocking him, and they said to the people around, you know what, this is not so hard. We're in good shape. He's an old man. We don't think he can do it. And if he does do it, that means that it's obviously easier than it looks. So they watched him go up the mountain, and he went up, and he arrived. And they said it's obviously easier than it looks. So they went up, and as they were walking, they started to slip on the ice and fall, and they had broken bones, and they hurt themselves. So they said later to Rabbi Meir Premishlan, how is it that you were able to go up? We're young guys, and we were not able to go. And he said to them that if you're bound above, you're bound below. If you're tied up above, if you're tied to Hashem above, you won't fall below. And that was the story of Rabbi Meir Premishlan. I'll tell you a few stories today that are just amazing stories. The first one is called the very first shidduch, the very first match. Now, most of my stories are coming from either Rabbi Zevin, which he has two books that are it was translated into English, and it's put out by Art Scroll, and they're called Treasury of Chassidic Tales. The one is called the Treasury of Chassidic Tales on the Festivals, Volume 1, and the second one is on the Torah. It goes according to the Parsha. So there's a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yerachmiel Tillis, and he's one of the main rabbis in Sfas, in Ascent Center in Sfas in Israel. And he chose 100 of his most favorite stories from Rabbi Zevin, and he put together a set called Saturday Night Full Moon, Volume 1, and Festivals of the Full Moon, Volume 2. There's a couple of short books to go along with it, but these are the main ones. And they're put out, by Menorah Books. Okay, they're printed in Israel. So the very first story, and I mentioned last week, all the Hasidic stories are coming from the followers of the Baal Shem Tov, the main disciples of the Baal Shem Tov. And after the Baal Shem Tov, his successor was Rabbi Dovid, the Maggid of Mezrich. And all of the stories are coming from either the Baal Shem Tov and his disciples, his followers, his students, and Rabbi Dovid, Maggid of Mezrich, and his students and his followers. And they became the leaders of the different dynasties that we see today and throughout history. There was the Bobover Rebbe, the Vizhnitzer Rebbe, the Belzer Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Satmar Rebbe, and all these different dynasties are traced back to the Maggid of Mezrich, traced back to the Baal Shem Tov. So I like to tell the name of the story because it helps me to remember the entire story just thinking about the name. I used to do Mesiba Shabbos for kids here in North Miami Beach every Shabbos for about 14 years. And what I would do is I would practice on my family before I did the story. And I would practice for either Friday over Shabbos, Friday night, or Shabbos by day. And then Shabbos afternoon, I would go to the girls. The girls' Mesiba Shabbos were always done in someone's house. And the ages of the girls were from about 6 years old, and at the age where they were able to sit still and not make wild, up until Bas Mitzvah. And the boys from the same age up until Bar Mitzvah. So there was a large range of ages there, but they all sat and listened to the stories. They were enthralled with the stories. And we did this for 14 years. So I used to do the girls for an hour. So on the way to the girls, I would practice the story in my head or out loud to myself as I was walking to the house. And then that was the second time around, because I did it with my family the first time. Then as I left the girls and I'm walking on my way to shul to do their Mesiba Shabbos, which was an hour long also, I would practice a third time in my head. Now, sometimes the kids joined me as I was walking down the street. They would see me and they would join up. So I didn't tell the stories then because I didn't want to have to tell the stories twice. So I would talk about something else. But a lot of times I was walking by myself, and that was the third time I would go over the stories. And then I would go to shul and do the stories again. And by that time, I knew the stories really well. I had already practiced them a couple of times, even before I told them over to my family, because I wanted to be able to tell them over in a smooth and smooth way. Okay. So this story, the Rebbe here, his name is Rabbi Moshe Tzvi of Savran. I hope I'm pronouncing the town correctly. He passed away, to give you an idea, he lived from 1775 to 1837. And he was the disciple of Rabbi Levi Yitzchok of Berditchev and Rabbi Baruch of Mezhebush. And they were disciples of the Maggid of Mezhebush. A young unmarried chassid named Meir celebrated the New Year's festivals with his Rebbe, Rabbi Moshe Tzvi of Savran. A day or two after Simchas Torah, when he was admitted to the Rebbe's room for a parting blessing, he brought up the difficulties he was having in finding a wife. Because of his poverty and his threadbare, half-starved appearance, no one was willing to help him to find the marriage partner. Trust the Almighty, said the Rebbe. Agree to the first offer of a match, the first shidduch that's suggested to you. Excuse me, let me just grab a cup of water. Excuse me. Meir set out on his long journey to his hometown. He arrived in a certain village just as it was becoming dark, and so he entered the local inn to arrange to spend the night there. What met his eyes were a crowd of carefree men sitting around several adjoining tables, drinking liquor and laughing raucously at their own silly jokes. Wanting to keep a low profile and feeling fatigued and cold from the long day of traveling, Meir sat down next to the stove in the corner of the large room, as far away as possible from the crowded tables. It didn't help. The drinkers noticed him right away. One of them asked where he was from and why he was traveling. Meir responded with the name of his town and that he was returning there after having passed the Yom Tovim, the holidays, with his Rebbe. And what did you request of the Rebbe, they asked, and what blessing did he give to you? Meir innocently recounted what had transpired. I asked the Rebbe to pray for me that Hashem soon allow me to meet my destined wife. He said that I should accept the first shidduch, the first match that I am offered. One of the wild partiers smiled broadly and called out, listen, I've got a great idea for you. My sister's a young widow. She's very pretty, and she even has 100 silver rubles for a dowry. She's here right now in the kitchen. I'll introduce you, and you'll let me know what you think. What Meir did not realize was that this joker had no family connection whatsoever to this woman that he referred to as his sister. Rather, she was the daughter of the innkeeper, a man named Tzvi Velbke, who happened to be away from home that evening. The prankster ran into the kitchen, explained the joke to her, and asked her to play her role, saying it would be excellent for the inn's business, as many celebratory drinks would certainly be ordered. She decided to humor the tipsy customers and agreed. When she emerged into the main room, she was greeted with loud cheers and applause. A few minutes after he introduced them, the brother nudged Meir and whispered, so what do you say? Do you agree to the match? Shall we conclude it? Meir answered coolly, fine, I agree. The boisterous customers rushed to order a selection of hard drinks and began to merrily toast the new chassan, quote unquote, the new bridegroom. They had a great time calling out l'chaim and showering upon him their blessings for his fortunate engagement, while privately they ridiculed the naive young chassid. An hour or so passed in this manner when suddenly one of them yelled out. He said, I have a great idea. Look how much fun this engagement celebration has been for us. Let's continue by making the wedding right now. and then we can throw a really super party. His suggestion earned an enthusiastic reception until a slightly more sober member of the crowd wondered out loud, "But none of us here is a rabbi. We don't know the text of the kesubah, of the marriage contract document, or how to conduct a chuppah, a wedding ceremony." Meir, overhearing them, spoke up that he knew how to write a kesubah and how to administer the wedding. The crowd burst into pleased laughter. One of them borrowed from Meir his talus and drafted 4 others to hold it up at the corners with broomsticks over their head of the couple as a chuppah canopy. Meir carefully scribed the marriage contract, and after one of the drunks cheerfully donated a gold ruble, Meir solemnly intoned the traditional phrase to the giggle of the quote-unquote bride. "You are sanctified to me as my wife with this coin according to the laws of Moshe and Yisrael." And he gave her the gold coin. After everyone loudly shouted out Mazel Tov in unison when the glass was broken, the bride on a chair and the groom were hoisted onto the shoulders of the crowd. The customers were enjoying their entire prank so much, they began to tease the young chassid even more outrageously, including poking at his hat and pulling him by his kapata, by his long coat. When they started to actually slap him around a bit, Meir realized that the situation had become untenable. And at the first respite, he snuck out of the building. He managed to arrange to sleep in the house of a nearby non-Jew, trusting that the bride would be cared for by her brother. The next morning, he returned to the inn, but he stopped outside the entrance. He was apprehensive about going in and possibly having to deal with further verbal and physical abuse. As he was standing there deliberating what to do, he overheard one worker say to another, "Look, the boss is about to leave." Meir had gathered from the conversation the preceding night that his bride was not only the sister of the partier, but also the daughter of the innkeeper. He walked quickly over to the man indicated, and he said, "Good morning, Shver. Good morning, father-in-law." The innkeeper's eyes opened wide in shock. "Who are you? What are you talking about?" he demanded. "I'm the fellow who married your daughter last night." "Well, what? How can this be? Where is she? In the kitchen?" He couldn't contain his agitation. "Come out here right away, now," he shouted to her. The daughter ran out and explained, "This Chassidic guy kept everyone amused last night. He's so naive. I pretended to be someone's eligible widowed daughter, widowed sister, and we made a pretend engagement and a marriage ceremony. It was so much fun. And Tati, father, you'll be quite pleased when you see how much extra food and mashka and liquor was sold." Her father was visibly upset. He plied her with questions in order to find out exactly what had taken place. When he heard her answers, he became furious, and he shouted at Meir, "You idiot! How dare you make a legally binding marriage with my precious daughter? Those silly ignoramuses may not understand the implications of a kesubah and of a wedding ceremony in front of witnesses. But if you are a chassid and a scholar, as your mode of dress indicates, you should have realized and you should have known better. How can you not realize that they were playing a joke on you?" He became angrier and angrier until finally he slapped young man Meir across the face. "I cannot abide by this. You must divorce her immediately." Meir said not a word. He simply shook his head from side to side. The innkeeper quickly perceived that a violent approach was not going to succeed. "I better not get him too angry," he thought, "and then he will refuse me out of spite. I'll have to speak reasonably to this pathetic tramp to persuade him to release my poor daughter." Thereupon he changed his tone and he asked the young man again to agree to divorce his daughter, and this time calmly and politely. When that didn't work, he offered him 20 silver rubles. "After all," he said in a friendly tone to Meir, "this must be a difficult experience for you." To his surprise, the visibly impoverished chassid quickly refused. He raised his offer several times, 50, 80, 100 rubles, which is a significant amount of money, but each time with the same lack of success. Sir, said Mayer finally, you might as well stop trying to buy me off. Let me tell you what's really going on. I was with my Rebbe for the Yom Tovim for the holidays. I had a private audience with him afterwards, and he told me to accept the first marriage proposal that was offered to me. I trust him completely and simply followed his orders. Those people last night intended to play a trick on me and had a good time laughing at me, but I related to everything said to me as real and accepted the match wholeheartedly. Even though you don't want me as a husband for your daughter, I could never consider nullifying the marriage without a specific order to do so from the Rebbe. Who's your Rebbe? Demanded the innkeeper. Rabbi Moshe Tzvi of Savron in Kishinev. The innkeeper smiled at hearing this. I know your Rebbe. I have great respect for him. Let's go see him together. Whatever he decides, we will do. When they arrived in Savron, Mr. Belka expressed to the Rebbe why he was so upset. Last night, I had to be away from the inn. I left my daughter in charge. This pauper wanders in, hears from some unrestrained clown who makes up a story that my daughter is his widowed sister and she wants to get married again. And so he accepts this joker's proposal to marry her without ever being told that she's my daughter. Then they went under a chuppah in front of witnesses. One of the customers gave a gold ruble to be in place of the ring, while he himself even wrote a kesubah for the occasion. I wanted to dissolve this, and I offered him some money to do so, but he won't agree until you first approve. I still am prepared to stand by my final offer to him of 100 suval rubles, which is a fortune for him, but only if he agrees to divorce my daughter. The Rebbe turned to Meir and insisted that he was delighted with the match. The innkeeper's daughter struck him as a nice person, of a good disposition, a generous and kind person, and she seemed to be quite willing to be married to him. The Rebbe turned back to Tzvi Valpke and said, I suggest that you go to your hostel here and get some rest. In the meantime, I'll speak further with the young man about the matter. A few hours later, the innkeeper came to the Rebbe's house again. The Rebbe told him, we discussed the divorce and your offer at length. My advice is that you give him 1,000 silver rubles, not 100, and I can arrange to get the document of divorce and 2 witnesses within a week. At that time, I'll be able to introduce you to an excellent young man from a respectable family that I thought of for your daughter. And he's an accomplished Torah scholar as well. And you not even worry about this of suffering a financial loss. This one will come with 1,000 silver rubles that he's prepared to contribute to the marriage. You can either keep the money or leave it for the young couple to start their new home. Of course, I will do whatever the Rebbe thinks is best, responded the stunned innkeeper. As for the delay of a week, anyway, I need that amount of time to arrange the money. The Rebbe took 300 rubles from his desk drawer and hurriedly summoned one of his Chassidim to buy a new suit and an impressive shtreimel for Meir. With his new clothes, he seemed like a different person. Everyone was struck by his newly presentable appearance, which allowed his intelligence and his refinement to shine through. Exactly a week later, the innkeeper returned with the money and accompanied by his daughter to participate in the divorce procedure. The Rebbe suggested that Velbeke first go with him to the Mace Medrash, the study hall, for a peek at the young man that he had in mind for Velbke's daughter. From the door, he pointed out a young man in new clothes who was studying intently at a table in the middle of the room. The innkeeper did not recognize Meir at all. At that point, the Rebbe turned and he murmured to Velka, "This young chassid, he's already your daughter's husband." A pained look crossed the innkeeper's face. The Rebbe ignored it and swiftly continued, "I can guarantee that this young man comes from a fine family of distinguished ancestors, and he possesses excellent character traits. The only problem anyone could find with him was his poverty. The new clothes and a good diet have already improved his appearance considerably. Now, Baruch Hashem, he will also have 1,000 silver rubles. You're strongly advised to let the marriage remain in force. He is really the ideal husband for your daughter. I want you to know, this shidduch, this match, was truly ordained from the one above. The reason that it had to come about in such an unusual manner is because otherwise you would never have agreed to it." Tzvi Velpke and his daughter were convinced by the Rebbe's words and agreed happily to leave the marriage in place. The couple went on to live together in joy and prosperity and in full compatibility with the bride's pleased parents. The very first shidduch. Any feedback, anybody? Any thoughts? Don't be shy.
David,
Yes.
I don't understand the title.
It's called the very first match, meaning that the Rebbe told him, he was saying to the Rebbe, "I can't get married, I can't find the shidduch." And the Rebbe told him, "Trust Hashem," and agreed to the very first offer of a shidduch that suggested.
Now I get it. Okay, thank you. That was a good story.
Yeah. There's another book that's very interesting. It's called Short Stories About the Rebbe. And this is a recent book, and it's all short stories about the Rebbe. And there's a lot of stories in here, and this is not one of the stories. This is just recounting some of the information that the Rebbe shared with some students that came to the Rebbe. Some college students were brought to the Rebbe in around 1970, and they were allowed to ask the Rebbe a bunch of different questions. And I found this very, very interesting. First of all, during this audience, a college student asked the Rebbe to explain what's the essence of a Rebbe. And the Rebbe answered that a Rebbe is like a generator, and every Jew is a light bulb. In order to live, we need vitality. And what's the source of this vitality? The neshama within each and every one of us. The neshama is a light bulb, but the bulb needs a wire to transmit the electricity. Without this wire, it cannot illuminate. These are the roles of the Rebbe, the Chassidim, and the entire Jewish people. The Rebbe is the generator, and we are the light bulbs. We must search for suitable wires that will attach us to the generator. If anybody wants to jump in or interject, feel free. And that happened again. Another group of Hillel college students in New York had an audience with the Rebbe in 1970 on Monday, the 8th of Adar. The Rebbe opened the Yechidus, this audience, with some inspiring words, and then the students were given the opportunity to ask questions regarding Judaism and Hasidus. During the lively session that ensued, one of the students asked to the Rebbe, "What's the role of a Rebbe?" And the Rebbe answered, "To find the switch in each and every Jew and help him connect himself to the power plant." They asked the Rebbe once, this is another one. The following is an excerpt from an audience of Mr. Yehuda Avner. The Rebbe said, please let me tell you what I'm trying to accomplish." The Rebbe said to him, Imagine that you're looking at a candle. What you see is nothing more than a combination of wax with a wick at its center. What transforms this wax and wick into a candle? Excuse me. Or in other words, when do they fulfill the mission for which they are created? Let me just take a sip of water. When you bring fire to the candle and ignite a flame, that's when the candle is transformed into a source of light and fulfills its role. The Rebbe said these words in a rhythmic tone that got stronger and stronger. The Talmudic style wrapped the words in pleasantness that emphasized the idea that the Rebbe continued to weave. I don't know if I can do this good, but the wax is the wick, the wax is the body, and the wick is the neshama, the soul. When you light a neshama with the light of the Torah, a person fulfills his task, the purpose for which he was created. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm lighting neshamas with the light of Torah. A grating, stubborn hum could be heard from outside the room, signifying that many people were waiting their turn. And then I got up to say goodbye. But a minute before I did, I audaciously asked the Rebbe, "What about my candle? Did the Rebbe light my candle yet?" "No," the Rebbe replied as he grasped my hand. "I gave you the match. It's completely dependent on you. You're the only one who can light the candle." And this last selection here from this book, a group of students, Jewish students, once entered the Rebbe's study and posed questions regarding Judaism, faith, and science. Toward the end of the meeting, a student asked, "Is it true that the Rebbe has supernatural powers?" A tense silence reigned for a minute in the face of this brazen question. The Rebbe answered simply, "Every Jew has the potential to control nature. Every Jew has a godly soul that's connected to the infinite creator. Through Torah and mitzvahs, a person can connect with the creator, raise himself above the limitations of nature, and cause events that would be considered miraculous. The question is only to what extent he implements his ability." When I first became from, sorry, when I first became from, which was in the late 1970s, I was already in my late 20s, and I saw these different miraculous stories taking place, and I said, "Is the Rebbe, how is the Rebbe doing this? Does the Rebbe have this incredible power that he's so powerful above the regular people?" And they explained to me that it's not that the Rebbe is super powerful. It's that the Rebbe is more able to eliminate his ego. And because his ego is eliminated, what fills that void is Hashem, is godliness. There used to be a saying in the old Westerns, "This town ain't big enough for the both of us," which means to say, Hashem is saying that this town, which is the body, there's only room enough for one of us to be in charge. The more you empty your own ego of yourself, the more godliness is able to fill up that void. And when godliness fills up that void, a person is able to do things that are considered supernatural or miraculous. There's a very interesting book that I have that's called The Tzaddik and His Students, the Rebbe Chassid Relationship by Rabbi Shlomo Majeski. It's put out by Sichas in English. And there he explains, what does it mean? What's the difference between Ruach HaKodesh, divine spirit, and what does it mean when a Rebbe does miraculous things? So he said miracles take place because Hashem is giving us a glimpse of godliness being revealed in the world. And one of the reasons that we have these Chassidic stories where it's basically the same thing, it's revealing godlinesses in the world, is for the purpose of strengthening our faith in Hashem and in the tzaddikim, in his messengers. This next story is there's a phenomena in this we see in Chassidic stories. There's something called a tzaddik nister, hidden tzaddikim, hidden saints. And what this is brought down in the Gemara. I was looking at this today, earlier today. If you go to Chabad.org and you type in this the name, the words 36, it'll come up right away. So it explains the idea of there's 36 tzaddikim, 36 perfectly righteous people that are hidden. People don't know who they are in every generation. And in fact, one of the actual number that's given, it's talked about 36, but it's in truth, there's 36 hidden tzaddikim in Israel, and there's 36 hidden tzaddikim outside of Israel. But in general, it's talked about the 36. In Hebrew, the word for 36 is lamed, vav. Lamed is 30, and vav is 6. So these 36 are called the lamed vavniks. And when you go to Chabad.org, and all this information is there. And it explains where in the Gemara this is discussed and where this is talked about. So it says that these 36, that godliness is revealed in the world and they sustain the world. And for some reason, Hashem wants them to be hidden. Hidden means that people don't know who they are, or sometimes people know who they are to a certain extent, but they themselves don't know who they are. One of the people that was asking questions in Chabad.org was saying, do they themselves know who they are? And a lot of times the answer is no, because they're so humble that they wouldn't suspect for a moment that they're one of the 36. So they don't even realize that they're one of the 36. There's a lot of discussion in the questions and answers after the article, because it's not a long article, but it's very interesting. And sometimes they do know. So these are two stories regarding these, what's called a tzaddik nister, a hidden tzaddik. Now the first one involves the Frierdiker Rebbe. It involves the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi. He was the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he was one of the foremost students of Rabbi Dovid, the Maggid of Mezrich. In Hayom Yom, it explains that the tradition in Chabad is that when the Alter Rebbe put together the Tanya, it took him 20 years to put together the thoughts and the letters and the discourses until he put together the Tanya. The reason that I'm telling you about the 20 years, because this story, it sounds like it schleps out over many years. And a person could ask, why is this taking place over so many years? Why didn't the Rebbe just get cut to the chase and do what he had to do at the end? And the reason is because it had to take so many years for the Rebbe to put this together, and then it sort of came together all at the end. That's my own words. So this story is called, in the storybook here, this is called From Festivals of the Full Moon by Rabbi Yerachmiel Tillis from Ascent in Sfas. And he calls the story the yokel at the theater. But I call the story Carl the Janitor, because that's really what the story is about. And this is the story. On the side of the main road near Lyozna lived a Chassidic Jew whom we shall call Beryl. The kids used to ask me, are all your stories true? I would tell them, every single one of my stories is true. The only thing that I make up is sometimes I don't know the name of the person, and we'll call him Beryl or Yankel or Maishka or some Jewish name. But that's the only thing that's made up. Everything else is 100% true. If it's not true, I wouldn't tell it to you. So let's get that out of the way. The kids know where the stories are coming from. So on the side of the main road near Leosh, a Jew who we shall call Beryl and his family. He barely eked out a living as a Torah tutor, and the family's livelihood depended mostly on his wife's excellent baking. On his way into town each day to tutor his students, he would take along a load of his wife's bagels and other delicious baked goods to deliver to their regular customers as he went along his way. One freezing Russian winter night, as a heavy blizzard and blustery wind continued to pile high mounds of snow above the ground, you can almost close your eyes and put on a coat and sit back and imagine yourself in the Russian winter here. So one freezing Russian winter night, as a heavy blizzard and blustery wind continued to pile high mounds of snow above the ground, Beryl heard a sudden sharp knocking on his front door. He opened it, and there stood a shivering man, nearly frozen to death in the barrage of a merciless storm. Beryl pulled him into the house, poured him a quick shot of vodka, and wrapped him up in blankets and prepared him a large glass of hot tea. In those days, a wood-burning oven served both as a cooking surface and as a heating source. The warmest place to sleep was on a platform that was built above the oven. Usually the little children slept on it, being prone to throwing off their blankets. However, due to the traveler's vulnerable condition, Beryl set his children down on the blankets on the floor and invited his guest to sleep above the oven. The next morning, at first light, the man arose, dressed, and departed. An hour or so later, when the children woke up, they were surprised to find themselves on the floor. They quickly scampered back to their place over the stove to warm up and perhaps sleep some more. Well, this is not just like a fairy tale story. This is an actual story that took place with all of its details. One of the little boys banged his foot into something that was hard. And as he did, gold and silver coins started pouring onto the floor from the sack that he had unintentionally kicked over. And astonished and excited, they climbed down as fast as they could, ran into their parents' room, and enthusiastically reported their find. Was their father delighted about this unexpected treasure? No, just the opposite. In fact, he was terrified. Surely the bag belonged to the traveler that had slept there. He would report the loss of a significant fortune. The police or the military would investigate, and he, the poor Jew who had only tried to help a traveler in need, would be accused of theft and perhaps arrested and thrown into prison. As soon as he could, Beryl hurried into Liadi to speak to his Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the founder of Chabad School of Chassidus. He told the Rebbe everything that had happened and asked him what he should do about this fortune that had been left in his house. The Rebbe answered, "My friend, don't worry. I'm telling you, no one will come looking for it or make inquiries. The Almighty has sent it to you as a gift." He explained to his amazing chassid. He explained to his amazed chassid that, of course, if the man should come back, the money must be returned to him. But he wouldn't, nor was there any way to find him, since he didn't know his name or even the direction in which he was traveling. Therefore, the traveler must have given up all hope of its recovery, and it was completely kosher to keep all of the coins. Noting his chassid's nervousness, the Rebbe continued, "This is my advice. Put the money somewhere safe. Don't let anyone around here know it or see it or know anything about it. Don't make any changes in your lifestyle. Continue teaching your students until the end of the semester. By then, you will be convinced that no one's looking for the money, and whoever the owner is will have given up hope of recovering it, which in Jewish law is equivalent to relinquishing ownership. And come to me then, and I'll advise you what to do with the money." At the end of the semester, the tutor returned to Rabbi Shneur Zalman to hear his counsel. The Rebbe told him that the time had come for him to move to town. He should search for a building to purchase with living quarters upstairs and a storefront at street level. And then he should buy some merchandise for resale. open up a business, and with Hashem's blessings, he would be successful. The Rebbe said, after a year, return here and give me a report, and I'll advise you what to do next. Beryl did exactly as the Rebbe said. A year went by. When he came to consult the Rebbe again, the Chassid reported that his business was doing quite nicely. And Baruch Hashem, and to tell the truth, all of his investments in home and store and merchandise had barely made a dent in the hoard of coins. The Rebbe nodded and suggested to him to cease buying his merchandise locally, and instead to buy in larger quantities from the wholesalers in Vitebsk, which was the main city in that region. That way he would make a greater profit in his own store, and he could sell to the other retail merchants in Lyozh. Come back in another year and apprise me of your situation, the Rebbe concluded. The Chassid did as the Rebbe advised. Another year went by. When Beryl arrived for his annual appointment, he told the Rebbe that his sack was still mostly full, and that his businesses had become much more profitable due to his purchasing expeditions to Vitebsk. The Rebbe said, "Is it not so that the wholesalers of Vitebsk acquire their goods from the distributors in Moscow? Go there and buy directly, so that this year you can sell to the wholesalers in Vitebsk as well to the dealers in Lyozh and your own customers." And then the Rebbe blessed him and also reminded Beryl to come again in a year's time and let him know the state of affairs. Just keep in mind that all this is going on while the Alter Rebbe is writing the Tanya, and during that 20-year time where the Rebbe is putting together the wording of the Tanya. And so the Chassid did. Another year passed. Beryl's enterprise was now one of the largest of its kind in all of Russia. When he had his annual conference with the Rebbe and described to him the vastness of his business and his success, thanks to the blessings of the Almighty, nevertheless, he added, there still remained in the sack much gold with which to further expand the business. The Rebbe smiled and responded, is it not so that the distributors in Moscow buy from the exporters in Königsberg, which was then in the metropolis of Eastern Germany? In 1946, it was annexed by the Soviet Union and renamed Kaliningrad. Travel there periodically and buy in a very large quantity from the manufacturers. You can then sell to the distributors in Moscow, as well as to the wholesalers in Vitebsk and the retailers in Lyozh. You notice that the Rebbe doesn't want them to lose the smaller businesses. The Rebbe still wants them to provide. This is my own words. The Rebbe still wants them to provide for the smaller stores, the smaller retailers. He doesn't want to leave them off, even though the Rebbe is telling him to go higher and higher in the chain. Another year went by. The unsophisticated Chassid had become among the wealthiest businessmen in all of Russia. Beryl's expeditions to Königsberg involved exceptionally large amounts of investment. Before each of these trips, the Chassid made it a habit to visit the Rebbe and request a blessing. On one such occasion, the Rebbe said to him unexpectedly, You travel regularly to Königsberg, yet you've never once bought me a present from there. The man was speechless. He felt overwhelmingly embarrassed. When he reached Königsberg, before attending to any of his business affairs, he went to the busy commercial street with stores and specialized in valuable items of gold and silver. And there he bought a very expensive snuff box made out of pure gold. And upon his return to Lyozh, he went immediately to the Rebbe's house to present it to him. The Rebbe said, This is very nice, but it's not what I was hoping for. The Chassid was taken aback at the Rebbe's words, and after leaving the Rebbe's presence, he resolved that on his next trip, he would buy something even more fine and more expensive. On the same street as before, he purchased an even fancier snuff box. Not only was it made of pure gold, it was also inlaid with filigree silver and encrusted with precious gems. It cost a small fortune. He confidently presented it to Rabbi Schneerzam. The Rebbe looked at it carefully for a few moments, but then said, "This is very, very nice. But again, it's not what I had in mind." Before his next trip, when he made up his regular request for a blessing, the Rebbe said something that truly, before his next trip, when he made his regular request for a blessing, the Rebbe said something that truly bewildered him. "Tell me, in all your visits to Königsberg, did you ever go to the theater?" Never mind that this pious villager would never ever consider attending a theater. It's quite possible that he didn't even know what a theater is, and certainly not what goes on inside of one. Nevertheless, he reckoned that if the Rebbe bothered to mention it to him, it must be that that's what he's supposed to do. He couldn't fathom the reason why, and he understood still less once he found out what a theater is. But on his next trip to Königsberg, he made inquiries as soon as he arrived, and he found directions to the main theater of this cosmopolitan European city. When he walked up to the cashier's window and asked to purchase a ticket, she asked him if he wanted front, middle, back, or balcony. He had no idea what she was talking about. Please just give me your most expensive seat," he responded politely. He was ushered upstairs to a private compartment with a thickly upholstered wide chair. Being quite tired from his long journey, he struggled to keep his eyes open as he stared at the stage below, which was as yet completely blocked by a tall crimson curtain. What's going on? He couldn't venture a guess at what was supposed to happen next. What happened was that suddenly all the lights in the building were dimmed. They're getting ready for the show. The chair was so comfortable. He was exhausted, and the theater was now dark. You guessed it, this naive Chassid Beryl fell deeply asleep. He never saw any of the performance. And indeed, he did not even know there was a performance because he continued to sleep soundly even after he ended. Finally, after everyone else had gone home and all of the seats were vacated, one of the staff gently woke him up. It was the janitor. Just to let you know, anybody that joined late, this is not just some poetic story. This is an actual event that took place with all of its details. All the seats were vacated, and one of the staff gently woke him up. It was the janitor. "Excuse me, sir, but you really have to get up and go home now. I have to finish cleaning up and lock the building." The chassid was embarrassed and began to apologize for any inconvenience that he had caused. "Oh, that's all right, sir," the janitor interrupted hastily, also a bit embarrassed. "By the way, sir, I see by your manner of dress that you not come from this country. Where are you from?" "I come from Belarus, from White Russia." "What town?" "Lyozhna." "Really?" asked the janitor further. "You appear to be a chassid. Perhaps you're acquainted with Reb Zalman?" "Acquainted? He's my Rebbe." "You don't say. Well then, when you get home, please give him my regards." "And who are you? What's your name?" "My name is Carl." The chassid thought that it was quite strange that a janitor in a theater in Königsberg should have any connection to a Chassidic Rebbe, but he didn't ask any questions. Back in Lyozhny, he went right to the Rebbe's house and delivered the message. To his astonishment, the Rebbe smiled broadly and said, "Ah, this is the present that I was hoping for." Before his next trip to Königsberg, the Chassid visited the Rebbe as usual to receive his blessing. And before he left, the Rebbe handed him a small parcel and asked him to deliver it to Carl. "But please, after you complete your business affairs, but before departing from home, be sure to get the parcel back from Carl." On his first evening in Königsberg, the Chassid made his way to the theater. He again purchased a ticket for a private box, and after the lights were dimmed, once again enjoyed a refreshing nap after his long journey, confident that Carl would find them after the performance. When Carl the janitor woke him up at closing time, this chassid Beryl and told him how happy the Rebbe had been to receive his regards, and that he had just before his current trip, the Rebbe had requested that he deliver this package to him. Carl said with wonderment, "For me? Really?" When he finished his business affairs, the chassid returned once more to the theater. When Carl discovered him there before closing, he expressed surprise that the chassid had come so soon back to the theater. The chassid quickly explained that the Rebbe had ordered him to bring the package back with him. "Oh, really? I didn't even open it up yet. Wait for a minute, please, and I'll just fetch it." When Carl opened it up, the businessman could see that it was filled with papers that were handwritten by the Rebbe himself. Excitedly looking over Carl's shoulder, he realized instantly that this was a manuscript of Chassidic teachings. Carl began to thumb through the pages, scanning them quickly. And then he read one page closely and murmured, "Ruach HaKodesh," divinely inspired. Finally, a few pages later, Carl said to the chassid, to Beryl, "Tell Reb Zalman that I said that this is truly divinely inspired, and that I don't know what teachings will be left for Mashiach Tzidkenu, for our righteous Mashiach, to innovate when he arrives, and may it be soon." And then he wrapped the package and he gave it back to the chassid. Shortly after the chassid returned the package to its author, Rabbi Shner Zalman finally decided to allow its publication. And so on the 20th of Kislev, 5557, December 1796, the Chassidic classic Tanya was first printed. Before releasing the manuscript for publication, the Rebbe had arranged for written approbation from two of the greatest disciples of the Maggid of Mezrich, the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, and the Rebbe's own teacher. These are printed at the beginning of the Tanya, but it seemed that those approbations were not enough. The Rebbe also required the oral approval of Carl, the theater janitor in Königsberg. And the epilogue, called the epilogue, it says, "From this story, it's known that Carl was one of the 36 hidden tzaddikim upon whom the survival of the world depends." That's called Carl the janitor, or the yokel at the theater. Anybody want to give some feedback or some ideas or thoughts? Don't be shy.
I think that was an incredible story.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. Well, one of my all-time favorites.
Wow.
Very good. Very good.
Any other thoughts? I can go on for another hour or two, but everybody's got stuff to do. So Isaac is saying, go ahead. Well, I don't want to abuse anybody. If you want to hear another story, I'm up for it. We're talking about tzaddikim, the story of hidden tzaddikim. I mentioned in the beginning, if you go to Chabad.org and type in the words in the search engine there, type in just the words 36, you'll see what the source of the 36 hidden tzaddikim is in every generation. It's first discussed in the Gemara, in Gemara Sota, that tells the page, so you can look at it yourself, and it explains what's the source. But apparently there has to be these 36 tzaddikim in every generation that sustain the world. And I mentioned before, sometimes these tzaddikim are so hidden that they themselves, a lot of times they themselves don't even realize that they're one of the 36, because they're so humble as a result of their characteristics, of their personal emotional characteristics, their midos. They don't even realize that they're one of the 36.
Thank you. That was very illustrative of what one of the 36 could be. And it's a good time to say, I wish everyone a happy Rosh Chodesh Elul.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay. You're welcome.
I don't want to hold anybody back.
What are
If
you
you,
doing for the next 4 days?
what am I doing for the next 4 days?
Greenberg. I'm asking Mrs. Greenberg where she's going for the next 4 days. Rosh Chodesh is not till Thursday.
I think she signed off already.
Gegangen. So tell me another story.
Okay. This one is called The 10th Man. This is also one of my favorites. And if you want to look for later, this is in the book. It's called Saturday Night Full Moon by Rabbi Yerachmiel Tillis. And it's put out by Menorah Press. Yerachmiel Tillis is the main storyteller par excellence from Ascent Institute in Sfas. A lot of his stories are he learned the art of storytelling from Rabbi Zevin, who put out the Treasury Chassidic Tales on Torah and on the festivals. This is not one of those stories because it's a more current story. It involves the Rebbe, but this is one of my favorite stories. On a certain religious moshav in Israel, there lived a woman who suffered greatly and had health problems whenever she gave birth. With each birth, the situation worsened until finally the doctors told her that she would be endangering her life if she tried to give birth another time. And now she was pregnant again. She visited great rabbis for advice and Mukobalim, Kabbalists, and Chassidic rabbis for blessings. She also prayed at the gravesite of the many righteous ones that are buried in the Holy Land. Nevertheless, she still felt frightened, as recent examinations had not revealed any change for the better in her condition. And then someone suggested to her that she write to the Lubavitcher Rebbe in Brooklyn. It seemed strange and a bit silly to her to consult someone outside of Israel, but she decided to do it. Shortly before she was due to give birth, she received the most remarkable response from the Rebbe. The Rebbe wrote that near the Moshav, the Rebbe has never been to Israel, keep in mind. The Rebbe said that near the Moshav, near the settlement that she lives, in a certain direction, was a spring. And on the other side of this spring was a factory. Just as a side note, the Rebbe has sometimes described these kind of details to people that lived in Israel, and the Rebbe's never been in Israel, and he's describing to them the intricate details of their neighborhood. Okay, so the Rebbe wrote that near the Moshav, near the settlement, in a certain direction, there was a spring, and on the other side of the spring was a factory. The workers leave there each afternoon at 4:30. Her husband should walk over there before that hour and stand near the gate. When the workers emerge, he should count them one by one, and when the 10th worker exited, her husband should follow him. What an answer! They could scarcely believe it. Nevertheless, the next day, the woman's husband followed the Rebbe's directions, and upon arriving at the factory on the far side of the spring, he took up his post outside of the gate. He stared and stared at his watch, and finally it was 4:30. The workers began to file out. 1, 2, 3. The 10th man was very ordinary looking. Nothing about him seemed special at all. In fact, he seemed hardly distinguishable from the ones before him or after him. The husband shrugged. The Rebbe said to him, so he would follow him. So follow him he would. The Rebbe said to follow him, and so follow him he would. The man walked and walked, finally arriving at a nearby settlement. He went straight to a certain house, entered, and closed the door behind him, just as anyone would do upon returning home from his day on the job. The husband stood gazing from a distance, momentarily perplexed, but then realized that he had no choice other than to try to knock on the house after him. He thought to himself, it can't be that the Rebbe just told me to come here and follow him, and then I'm just going to stand here. I got to do something. So it must be that I'm supposed to knock on the house. He approached the house and knocked on the door. A woman opened the door and asked him what he wanted. He told her that he wanted to speak to the man who had just come out before him, who had just come just before him, the man who worked at the factory near the spring. The woman nodded and told him to wait. She disappeared inside, and then a few minutes later, the man that he had followed came to the door. The man asked his unexpected visitor who he was and why he wished to speak with him. The wide-eyed husband stammered for a moment, and then replied, "To tell you the truth, I don't know why, but my wife is in a life-threatening situation, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe in New York wrote to us that I should follow you." And the man exclaimed, "I can't believe it," as waves of surprise and emotion passed over his face. "Even here, the Holy Rebbe has found me." He asked his startled visitor to tell him the whole story. The husband related about his wife's difficulties each time she gave birth, and their letter to the Rebbe, and the strange answer that they had received. "And so I went to the factory, and you were the 10th man. I followed you here, like the Rebbe directed, but more than that, I don't know." The man smiled. "Just wait right here a few moments," he said. He went back inside the house, and he returned shortly afterwards, displaying a few sugar cubes in his hand. "These are for your wife," he said. But then, much to the husband's surprise, he added, "But not for this birth. That's because she already just gave birth just a few seconds ago. She and the baby are both healthy, Baruch Hashem, and there are no problems at all." The husband was speechless. He wanted so much for the words he was hearing to be true, but he didn't know if he could safely believe them or not. And the man continued, "These sugar cubes are for future births. If she has any problems, give her these sugar cubes to eat, and everything will be fine right away." The husband bubbled over with profuse thanks, and the two men parted warmly. When he reached the Moshav, he quickly discovered that his wife had indeed given birth with no complications, exactly what the mystery man had said. All the residents of the Moshav rejoiced at the good news of the unexpectedly smooth birth, and even more so when they heard the extraordinary accompanying story. A few of them set out to get a bracha or a word of advice, or just to have a glimpse of the secret holy man, but they were not able to find him. The house was vacant, and he no longer worked at the factory. The epilogue after the story, it says that this story is known to us from a non-Lubavitcher Chassid, who at the time of the episode was living in the Moshav, and he saw this episode firsthand from the couple. And who the 10th man was or where he is now, I cannot tell you, but we may have caught a trace of him here at Ascent in Sfas. And then it says, a few years ago during an Ascent Shabbos meal, a student from the non-Chassidic Torah Vadas Yeshiva in Brooklyn stood up and asked for permission to tell a story about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he testified that he heard the story from his brother-in-law, who heard it from his study partner in the non-Chassidic Chaim Berlin Yeshiva in Kollel in Brooklyn, to whom it happened. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I must leave.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful day.